So great to see you all. So welcome. This is the ABE Narrative Writers Workshop. So hopefully you're all in the right place here. This is the plan for what we're going to do for the next couple of hours. Really briefly, we'll just do some introductions, make sure that you all remember who we have here on our MDE team that can support you in writing your narrative. Like I said, we're not gonna, we need to be pretty efficient with our time today, so we're not gonna do introductions of all of you as participants, but we hope you will continue to introduce yourselves in the chat and connect with each other. We will go through again the 5-year narrative process and timeline. We'll spend the majority of our time today on number 3 here, which is walking through the 2021 narrative requirements. And then we'll hope to have as much time as we can for questions and discussion. So just a note for you that we typically have done this workshop in the past as a full day workshop, and we've condensed it down to 2 hours. So we will do our best not to just talk at you the whole time, but there is definitely there will be plenty of time for you to kind of sit and listen, but we also welcome your questions along the way. So with that being said, I'm going to turn on my video for just a second so you can get a face to the voice. So as hopefully you all know, I'm Jody. I'm the one who's been sending you lots of reminder emails about the narrative. And I am the program quality specialist on the adult education team at MDE. And I am the one for the moment who is overseeing the 5-year narrative process. So I'm kind of your go-to person for questions or concerns about the narrative. And then I'm just going to ask my MDE colleagues to go ahead and introduce themselves as well.
Hello, everybody. This is Brad Haskamp. I'm the interim adult education supervisor with the Minnesota Department of Education. And I'll turn it over to Julie.
Hi, this is Julie Danko. I am the transition specialist at the Department of Education, and I will turn it over to Astrid.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Astrid Leiden, and I am the professional development specialist with the team. Great to have you all here today.
Great, thank you. And the rest of you who are here with us are from the ABE consortia that are in the 2021 narrative cohort. So that is this group of 8 consortia. This group represents a really good sort of variety of different kinds of programming and sizes of programming across our state. But we really do encourage you all to consider yourselves a cohort and consider each other resources as you kind of work through this extensive narrative process over the upcoming months. So as we dive in here, it will be important for you to have several documents available to you. And some of these I have shared with you via email already. And hopefully you may have already had a chance to do some printing if that's a possibility for you, or if you have a setup with a couple of different monitors, that might come in real handy. But do your best. What I would like to make sure at this point is that you have a couple of documents up and available to you. First of all, the most important document for this whole process is the 2021 Narrative Requirements document. And I'm just going to show you what that document looks like. Can somebody give me a quick confirmation that you are seeing that Word document on the screen right now?
Yes, we are.
Awesome, thank you. So this is the 2021 ABE Consortium Narrative Requirements document. This document is, I'm just going to check quick, about 10 pages long. And this document has the first 2 pages are sort of background and guidelines. And then starting on page 3, it walks through each section of the narrative, section 1 through 8. So this document is the one we're going to basically walk through today. So I hope that you have this document either open on your screen, ideally on another screen or monitor, if that's possible. Perhaps some of you had the opportunity to print it out, but that one will be really important, and we will be looking at that one a lot today. Another document is the 2021 narrative starting points document. Okay, so it looks like we were hoping to be able to stick these docs in the chat, but it looks like that is not going to work. So let me walk you all through where you can find that narrative starting points document. So if you go to a browser, and if you go to, can you confirm quickly you're seeing my browser and this website, mnabe.org?
Yes, we are, Jody.
Excellent. So if you go to mnabe.org, that is our Minnesota Adult Basic Education website. You'll see on the left-hand side, there's an extensive menu here. So you'll need to scroll down a bit to get to ABE funding and grants. You click on ABE funding and grants, then there are two ways to get to the narrative section, either over here in the same left-hand menu, or here in the main text area. So click on one of those two links for the 5-year narrative. And that will get you to this landing page that has all of the documents that you need for the 5-year narrative. So I encourage you to become familiar with this page throughout. As you're writing the narrative, you'll want to be coming back here to get the documents that you need. This link right here is the narrative requirements document that we were just looking at. That's the long 10-page one. Here are the other two documents that you may find useful today during this workshop and that I will be referring to. This one is the 2021 Consortium narrative starting points. And I'll explain more about that when we get to it in a second. And then the other one that I did email to you and that completely optional, but may be useful to you is this notes and ideas document. So that one is really just a note-taking tool for today's workshop as we are going through our presentation about these different sections. This is just a space for you to take some notes and think about, what ideas do you have, what questions do you have, who might be involved, what might the schedule look like. You can certainly do this, scribbling on your notepad or on a, just a blank Google Doc or whatever, or you can use this particular document if that's helpful to you. So then there are those three documents. And in addition, there are a bunch of document templates. Let me go back to our landing page here for the narrative. So on our mnabe.org 5-year narrative page, you'll see there are links to a number of templates for the documents in the different sections. We're not necessarily going to open or look at all of these templates today. That would be a lot for you to keep open. We may open up a couple of them if we need to talk about them more, but just know that all of the links for all of those templates are also linked on this page. All right, so I'm going to pause there for a second. And I'm going to ask you to confirm that you have the 2021 narrative requirements document open somewhere or printed or somewhere that you can see it, as well as the 2021 narrative starting points document and the notes and ideas document if you're interested in using that. All right, thank you for those of you who are chatting in. I will assume some of the rest of you are still negotiating all of that and figuring it out on your screen. Looks like a lot of you have it figured out. Thank you. Oh, yes, Allison is saving them in strategic places for the team. Good work. Good idea. Excellent. Definitely chat in, anyone, if you're having any problems with any of those. But I think in just a second, we're going to keep going. All right, excellent. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so I already showed you this page, and you'll want to maybe bookmark that or copy and paste that link into your notes document, and just know that is like the landing page for all sort of key documents and information about the 5-year narrative. All right. Not seeing anything in the chat that anybody's having any huge problems with those documents. So I'm going to keep going, but definitely chime in if you need any help with getting to any of those documents. So at this point, I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to review the requirements and the process that we're talking about here. So the reason that you have to do a 5-year narrative is because it's required in state statute. So state statute requires that all ABE consortia essentially apply for, excuse me, for reauthorization every 5 years. The reauthorization means that the consortium is then authorized to continue receiving an annually ABE funding, both state and federal ABE funding every year. So that's the compliance reason why you are doing this right now. However, as a leadership team, we really approach this 5-year narrative in sort of a dual purpose kind of a way. We acknowledge it fulfills an accountability and a compliance requirement. You have to do it because that's the way state law is written. And that's part of our job, is to make sure that our system is in compliance with state statute and federal law. However, we also really believe that the narrative should be useful and usable for you. So we don't want it to be just a compliance activity. We don't want you to just spend hours of time just sort of dotting I's and crossing T's. We want there to be some intrinsic value for you as a consortium as you're working through this. So please know that that is our intention, and that we hope that you can approach this task in that way as well. Oops, sorry about that. Hold on my controls here. All right, in terms of the process and the timeline, and you may recognize these slides are a review from when we met in September, but I just thought important to talk through these things again. In terms of the process, the first phase that many of you participated in was to review the 2020 5-year narrative. So you did that in August and in September. And then in phase 2 is kind of your training and preparation. And we had a narrative review wrap-up webinar at the end of September that many of you participated in. And that was a really good and positive convening. And sort of part 2 of phase 2 is this webinar today, where we're really trying to equip you with all the information that you need in order to create your narrative. Phase 3 starts tomorrow, which is the period of time you have to write your narrative, and it will be due on June 1st of next year. After you turn it in, then the last phase is that we do a site visit and talk through the narrative and the feedback and whether or not there is any follow-up action items. I am so hopeful that we might be able to visit you all in person at site visits next summer and fall, but obviously TBD. If we can't do in-person site visits, we'll do them virtually, which is what we've been doing this year, or just host an online meeting. All right. I'm gonna pause for just a second. Everybody's still with me. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I'm gonna keep going. All right, so we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna spend the bulk of our time today really working through the 2021 Narrative Requirements document. So as we get started, just a reminder again, I've said it several times now, this document and all of the templates are available at mnabe.org. You may want to use the notes and ideas document throughout this presentation today, or take your own notes. And I really suggest that your very next step is to make a plan to follow up with everyone who's here in this meeting from your team, to just put your heads together and remember what was said and make a plan for your next step. So when you think about starting points for your narrative this time, one starting point is about your last 5-year narrative, excuse me, and also your federal competitive application. So this is where, this document will be useful to you in the very beginning stages of your thinking about your narrative. So as you're thinking about, these are the sections for the narrative that you will be writing over the next 6 to 8 months. As you get started on each section, you can look back at your federal competitive application that you submitted in the spring of 2017, and you can look at these 3 sections and see if there's anything there usable for your section 1. You can also look back for, I think for all of the consortia here, the last time you or someone else in your consortium or some other group wrote a narrative was in 2015. Definitely look back at that. And see what's usable from that. It definitely won't be a copy and paste, but you should, refer back to it and see. So as one of your first activities in getting started, you should take some time with this document, with your federal competitive application, and with your 2015 narrative, and think about, what do you have already that could be a starting point for your 2021 narrative. And just a note to keep in mind, though, the narrative requirements have changed substantially since 2015. So definitely, don't expect that it's going to look the same as that. It definitely won't. It's been kind of reorganized. As you are looking at narratives from other consortia who have submitted in the last couple of years, please know that those narratives are quite similar to the 2021 narratives, but we do tweak a little bit every year. So it's possible that some items and some documents might be a little bit different. So you should also just keep that in mind. So in terms of audience, as you are writing your narrative, we want you to keep in mind a couple of aspects of who your audience should be. So remember that many of you participated in the review of 2020 narratives. So in part, you are writing for your reviewers, and your reviewers are peers. They also work in adult education, but they don't work in your consortium. So you should assume that they have a basic amount of knowledge about what ABE is and how it works and who ABE students are, but they don't know anything about the specifics of your community and your programming. So those are who your reviewers are. In addition, please also consider, especially when you're explaining like procedures and policies, that another key audience is your own staff, the staff of your consortium, particularly new staff or new consortium members. So we really want these documents to be useful for you as a tool that you can use when new folks come on board for onboarding, or that you can use if you are going to take a new position and leave ABE, you can pass this off to the person who takes, steps into your shoes to say, here's a record, here's documentation, here's details about the way things are, the way things work, and the plans that we have. So that's your audience. And also just a note, there are a couple of documents or narrative items that in some cases just don't apply, which is fine, but please be sure to explain that clearly. One example is there's an item that asks, are there any tribal nations in the area served by your consortium? And for many consortia, the answer is no, there are no tribal nations. So you just state that in a clear sentence, but please don't just skip it. Please explain if it doesn't apply and why. So, oops, sorry. Just to reiterate, I think you are aware of this by now, but we do at this point require online submission of the narrative. Some of your consortia, when you submitted in 2015, submitted a binder. That was acceptable at that point, but now we are no longer accepting those paper copies, a paper version of a narrative. So just plan from the get-go to be putting it online, and just know it has to be a publicly accessible website. It has to be everything available to all reviewers without them having to request permission. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end today, about what your options are in terms of making an online narrative. And then in terms of this narrative requirements document. So remember, this is the long 10-page document that we're talking about. That document outlines the 8 sections of the narrative. The way it's organized is that every section most sections have both narrative items and documents. Narrative items have numbers and documents have letters. So narrative items are really, they are responses, written responses to particular questions or prompts. Probably for the most part, you're going to create those specifically for this narrative. Maybe in some cases you have something like that you used to apply for a grant or something last year that you could pull, but I think you'll be doing some, writing, some creating of those responses. And those are sort of descriptions and explanations. They provide data, they show that you understand requirements, things like that. The documents can be things that are currently existing. They don't necessarily, not all of them would necessarily be created for this narrative. Although if you don't have anything currently existing, then you would be creating something. Like for example, an intake and orientation procedures document. If you already have a document that outlines those procedures, you can probably use that one in your narrative. Maybe you may edit it or update it. We really want those documents in particular to be useful and usable for you internally. So we don't just want that to be like, check the box, we did it, but more, we want it to be, hey, this document can really help us keep track of how the workflow happens, or this document can be helpful when we bring on a new staff and have to do training. So that's really the vision for those documents. All right, so I'm going to pause here again. Just checking for any questions in the chat. I don't see anything that anybody needs a response to. All right, so I'm going to keep going. Just an FYI, we do have a quick 5-minute break planned in the middle of our session today. So if you're getting antsy at some point, just know that we have a little break coming up. We'll have a good chance for you to step away and stretch or whatever. But I'm going to keep us going for now. Oh, sorry. And the last thing to say on this slide is we have templates for the documents, which are highly recommended, but not required. If you have your own version of some document, that's okay. All right. Now we are going to go ahead and get into the individual sections of the narrative. So we're just going to start at the beginning and work our way through to the end. I'm going to start with section 1. So what I'd like you to do right now is on your screen or on paper, be sure you have this document, be sure you're looking at it, and scroll to section 1. which has 3 items and no documents. There are no documents in section 1. So this is section 1. I'm going to give you just a minute to glance that over. And I'm going to assume you have it on your own screen or your own paper. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. I'll give you just a minute to read through what's in section 1. All right. And hopefully you at least got to skim that. So we just have, for section 1, it's pretty straightforward. Just a few tips on this section. We like maps. Reviewers tend to like maps and images and bullets and graphs, you know, things that give us a visual to really be able to visualize your community and your program. Those things are great. Think of section 1 as the framework. You don't have to get into a ton of detail, but you just want your reviewers to have enough background knowledge of your program that they can kind of fit in all of the other pieces and all of the details in the other sections. And for item 1.2, which is about providing data on the consortium's success in improving skills for ABE students, you will note that that item does not specify a time frame, and we are not requiring a particular time frame, but we kind of suggest that you look back over the last 2 to 5 years and the data that you have available and make the case. It seems like at least a couple years of data would be important, but any more than 5 is probably too much. So you got some leeway there, but that's our suggestion. And in terms of this section, we suggest a couple of pages, maybe up to 4, depending on, you know, the graphics and the things that might take up a little more space. So that is, those are the tips for section 1. I'll pause to take any questions. Teresa is asking, do you want these answers per consortium total or site by site or both? So in general, and I know this is going to be a challenge for some of you, particularly maybe Metro North and maybe Minneapolis, the larger consortia that have a number of different sites and members and programming maybe looks different in different places. This is a single application for a single grantee. So for the most part, I think you should be approaching this in trying to give us a sense of your programming as a whole as it serves to provide ABE services to the community, you know, defined by the geographic boundaries of the school districts in your consortium. I know that's challenging. And you may want to, those of you in bigger metro area consortia might want to like put your heads together a little bit with the folks from St. Paul who put together their narrative for this year, for 2020, because I know they struggled with some of that same issue. Because of course you need to give us some information about your different sites, but it would be too much to divide everything out site by site. So I would say particularly section 1, focus on the consortium as a whole, not site by site. And Marilyn, I see your question by year. I'm assuming you're asking if you, in item 1.2, we are not specifying here. I think that is a decision that's up to you, if how that makes sense. I think the key is to give your readers and your reviewers a basic sense of the kind of services and the kind of successes that you've had. And perhaps you could break that down by year. Perhaps it makes sense to give an average over years, and you've got leeway there to do that in the way that makes the most sense based on what data you have and you know, how you can interpret that data and make it readable and understandable for your reviewers. No problem. Okay, for 1.2, Kelly's question, for 1.2, we have the COVID factor. Can we use a typical year before the shutdown? So I think, Kelly, good question. That's exactly the reason why we don't want you to go back just 1 year, or that's one reason why we want more than 1 year's data. We know the 1920 data is very different than other years' data. So again, I'm going to say your question, can we use a typical year before the shutdown? I would say you don't necessarily have to use just 1 year, but absolutely you give us a sense of what was typical before the shutdown. You might also acknowledge where, some of the data from the year affected by shutdowns. That would also be acceptable. But yes, you can definitely go back earlier than when we started to have COVID effects. Thank you for that question. Any other questions about section 1? All right, excellent. I'm going to keep us going. So for section 2, I'm going to hand it over to Brad. Go ahead, Brad.
Thanks, Jody. Okay, so we'll continue the same pattern like with section 1 for section 2. So please go to your narrative requirements document and look through the section 2, which is the accountability section. This section has 3 items and 4 documents. Give you a chance to read through those, and then we'll give you some tips and have time for questions at the end of this section. Give you maybe another 30 seconds or a minute to look through this section. Okay, let's take a look at some of our tips that we have for section 2. Section 2 accountability. Overall, I would kind of tell you this is one of the most operational sections in the entire narrative. This should really be a solid operations manual, a how-to guide for how do you operate programming. We want to make sure that you clearly articulate how your consortium ensures that the funds are being used to provide effective and high quality services. So detail here is important. Also, we want to make sure that you're outlining specific processes, procedures. Maybe like a step-by-step is really helpful here. Think about how would you describe this to a new staff person? And think about this as an opportunity to find areas to improve. So in item 2.1, it will ask you about your ABE providers. Now, remember, ABE providers are any entity, many of them are school districts and community-based organizations, that receive ABE funding, state and federal or federal funding, to provide ABE instruction. Every consortia has at least one fiscal agent entity that is an ABE provider. However, we know that many consortia have additional members. They could be additional school districts, additional community-based organizations, jails, etc. Some of those members are ABE providers. Some of them are not. The key to keep in mind is, are they receiving ABE funding to provide ABE instruction? And that'll help you understand how many providers you have. Also in 2.1, it's asking you to describe your consortium meetings. If you don't know, every consortium is required to have at least 2 meetings per year, official consortium meetings. And that's according to state statute 124D.521. So with that, you want to think about how you identify and convene decision makers or staff for your consortium. These meetings can be virtual or in person, or both. There should be an attendance expectation, and that attendance expectation could vary based on staff, role, and whether or not that entity, that provider or member, has any programming at their site. You also will need to have developed and signed an annual agreement. And that connects with document D that we'll talk about a little bit later. Let's go to the next. For items 2.2, this is your program accountability procedures. And it's really kind of two parts that we parsed out this year, kind of made sure that that you would tackle both. What is your fiscal compliance? And what is your policy compliance? Like, how are you ensuring that the money is spent well? But also, how are you ensuring that policies are adhered to with each member, the fiscal agent, with all of your staff, and with any other providers in your consortium? In 2.3, we want to make sure that you have a solid student goal setting process. Is this consortium wide? Is it maybe varied depending on whether it's ESL program, career pathway programming, GED prep programming? It could vary, or there could be one solid or one consistent procedure depending. And this item 2.3 will often connect with document A. So let's go to the next slide here. And let's dive into those documents. Documents A, B, and C are procedures documents. These are how-to. How do you do intake and orientation, a step-by-step process? How do you do assessment procedures? How do you track contact hours? These really should be clear, concrete procedures, not just general theories or vague descriptions. Please be detailed and please be think about it as a how-to manual or instruction manual. There are templates in the mnabe.org website, on that narrative website, for you to utilize. And we strongly recommend that you utilize those templates. But if you have your own template, that is okay as well, as long as it contains all of the key information that is needed for that document. Document D is a little different. This is your consortium agreement. And this, we do not have a set template for this. However, let Jody know if you want to see any examples from any other similar consortia. Now, do you have any questions on section 2? Please enter your questions in the chat, or you can also click to raise your hand and we can answer your question. Section 2 is very detailed, but this section can be the most helpful section for any new staff in your consortium.
I don't see any questions yet, but I recognize some of you might be typing some. You know, I think what may be helpful, if you have no questions, do you want to put that in the chat just to give us a sense? If everybody's just waiting to move on.
And just want to encourage people to ask questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions. It's a lot of information and a lot of detailed information, and we're happy to answer any questions. Now's a great chance to get those things clarified.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you. It's good to know that folks are out there with us.
Absolutely. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any questions at this point in time on section 2, so I'm going to turn it over to Astrid to talk about section 3.
Great, thanks, Brad. Okay, so we'll give you, again, just a couple minutes here to let you navigate to section 3, get that section of the requirements pulled up and give you a chance to refamiliarize yourself with those questions and documents. I'll also suggest that you pull up the Consortium Professional Development Plan template as well. That's document E. And we'll provide some clarification about that document as well. Okay, let's talk through this section. So to start, we just want to give an overall tip as you work on this section, which is to really encourage you to engage a group of people from your consortium to work on the professional development section. Rather than trying to go at it alone, think about how you might pull in some different people from different roles in your consortium, from manager role, teacher role, support staff role, so that they can all work together to think about the professional development needs and priorities for your consortium. When we look at the items in section 3, the first couple ones I think are pretty straightforward. We have just a couple tips when we get to the third item, 3.3. There are a number of sub-bullets in this section. So some common pitfalls. That first sub-bullet asks you to articulate your process for determining professional development needs and priorities. When we get responses to this, often folks will talk about their needs and priorities, but skip over the process piece. So make sure you're talking about how you're determining the needs. Are you surveying staff? Are you using observations? Are you going from district priorities, etc.? We also, in this section, ask you to tell us which activities are mandatory for staff. And as you answer that question, think about the different roles in your program. Are there certain activities that are mandatory for new staff? Are there certain activities that might be mandatory for a particular role? So for all teachers or for all support staff. So be as specific as possible for that one. And then in the final sub-bullet, we ask that you include both the amount and the percentage of funding that is dedicated to professional development in your consortium budget. Then moving on to the documents, the most complex document here is the Consortium Professional Development Plan. And I'm going to ask Jody if you can pull that up on the screen. So there are several different sections to this plan. And can you enlarge that, Jody? Looks like we're in a preview.
Yep, I'm working on it. Let's see.
Okay.
Does that look, wait, hang on.
Getting closer.
Yep. How did I end?
Yeah, just, yeah.
There we go. Okay, that better?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
So in the first section of this document, it really walks you through the process of looking at a variety of data sources and thinking about what are the possible PD implications from that data. So first column is a question about the data. In the second column, we want you to respond to that question, but also think about what the PD implications might be. So for example, if the data tells you that you have a growing number of ESL level 1 students, a PD implication might be, if that's new for your program, you might need some training on working with lower level ESL students. So that's a place to reflect on the data and think about what are the training needs that might be associated with that. The next big section has to do with program staff PD activity participation to date. And we try to make this a little bit easier for you by allowing you to request the results of your consortium responses to the statewide PD survey and use that information to fill this out. So on December 1st, we'll be launching a statewide professional development survey that will be open through December 23rd. Ask that you encourage your staff to participate. Then once that survey closes, you'll be able to contact Marisa Giesler at Atlas for the data from your particular consortium. And you'll get an aggregate of responses that will tell you more about staff that have participated in different professional development, and then their responses to the rest of the questions about what their needs are, so that you can use that as you create your consortium plan. And then finally, the last section of the document is the plan itself. So you'll see that you start with identifying some priority consortium goals that have PD implications. So in this column, we really want you to think about some goals for your consortium that have implications for training for your staff. So again, going back to the example that I gave before, if you have a changing student demographic and one of your goals is to expand and diversify your programming to better serve that new student demographic, there might be some key training that your staff needs to be able to do that effectively. So that is what your plan will be grounded in. We encourage you to keep this manageable. We give a guideline of probably no more than 3 to 5 big PD goals for your consortium. And if you're a smaller consortium, maybe it's fewer than that. Can go back to the PowerPoint. And I see your question here. What if the amount or percentage changes depending on the year? I think as long as you're clear about how you are responding to this, this is fine. I think an average over the past 5 years would be fine. You could give the amount and percentage from the previous year if you feel like it's representative. Jody, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, good question, Anne. I would say give the previous years if you think that's representative. If you don't think that's representative, then you might choose to do an average. But either one would be fine as long as you're clear about what time period you're talking about.
Then in addition to the consortium-wide PD plan, you are also asked to submit a PD plan for different roles within your consortium. So one for someone who's in a manager or administrative role, one for someone in a support staff role, and one for someone who is in an instructional staff role. And then we ask that you remove any identifying information from those plans. And there is a template that you can use for those if you don't already have one that you use in your consortium. So I'll pause here for a moment to see if there are any questions about the professional development section. One other thing I just want to make sure to emphasize as you're thinking about submitting these documents should be forward-looking. So they will be plans that will articulate the goals and training for the coming year. So most likely the 2021-2022 year, assuming that this is something you're working on in the winter and the spring.
So now's your opportunity to ask any questions that are coming up for you about section 4.
Section 3.
Sorry, section 3. Thank you, Astrid. If no questions, why don't you go ahead and acknowledge that to us in the chat, and if we get a lot of those, then we'll know to keep going. Thank you, everybody, for responding.
Right. Okay, it looks like folks are doing okay so far. And we will send out a reminder in early January just to let you know, remind you that you can get those survey results from Marisa once the survey has closed. Okay, if there are no questions on 3, are we okay to move on to section 4, Jody, before we take a break?
Yeah, I think our timing is just fine. So yep, let's go through section 4 and then we'll take a short break.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so again, we'll give you just a minute to skim through the questions and documents in this section, which is focused on educational quality. And if section 2 is really sort of the nuts and bolts of operations in your program, this section really gets at the meat of your programming and what you're delivering to learners. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, let's start with some general tips. So this section can take quite a while to develop, in particular, the instructional program description. So we encourage you to bring your instructors in to help with this section. They are the ones who are doing the bulk of the work that's going to be described in this section. So engage them in writing it. Encourage you to start early and really allow time for writing and then for going back and editing. We're also asking in this section to articulate all the instruction that's offered across the consortium. So in the document, the instructional program description, you are going to be describing the whole range of what is being offered, and make sure that each one of your courses or types of instruction that's happening in your consortium is described in that document. And you can group those courses together if they are teaching the exact same content and have the same course goals. We strongly recommend that you use the template that we've provided. It provides a nice structure for really describing what's happening in your program. Let's go to the next section. For item 4.1, this is a complex item. We really want you to think about a variety of things as you answer this question about how high quality educational services are developed by your consortium. So think about, how are decisions made about what type of instruction to offer, and describe that to us. How do you make a decision about when to start offering a new class, or when to end a class, or what specialized programming to offer? How are you evaluating the instruction? Are you doing observations? Are you doing student surveys? Are you engaging with your stakeholders and partners? How do you ensure sufficient intensity, and how do you define that for your learners? How are you ensuring that they are getting access to enough programming to make educational progress? And then this question also asks you to describe how you are offering instruction on the essential components of reading and how those are incorporated into your program. And here you really want to think about the components as described by STAR or EBRI, those 4 essential components of reading. Let's go to the next slide. We have a new item this year, 4.2, and this is a place for you to really describe in detail your distance learning program or programming. We know that for most of you, this has really significantly expanded in response to COVID-19. So this is where you'll describe how that has been developed, as well as your future plans. Even once the pandemic is over and we go back to more in-person programming, what will distance learning programming look like for your consortium? Let's go to the next slide. Item 4.3 is focused on your content standards work to date. And so a distinction we want to draw here is, in this narrative item, we're asking you to describe what you have done up till now around content standards integration. Whereas document J, which is the content standards integration plan is looking to the future of content standards implementation. As you think about content standards implementation, we want you to think about a variety of different components. Think about the training that you have offered or your staff have participated in or will participate in. Think about what changes have been implemented in your instruction and your approach to instruction, and also think about any program structures that have been adjusted due to standards implementation. Let's go to the next slide. Item 4.3 is focused on career-focused programming. And in this item, you can refer to your instructional programming description and the courses that are described there. And Jody, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking maybe there is an error on this slide now with our numbering.
Yep, let's clarify that so at least we have it clear in the recording here. I think what happened is we've added 4.2, which shifted the other numbers. So this slide, the title at the top of this slide is correct, items 4.4 to 4.5, but the text here on the slide, I'm not sure if you're seeing my cursor.
Yes, we are. Thanks.
Those are incorrect. So this should be 4.4, which is about career focused programming. And this should be 4.5, which is about adult diploma programming.
Okay, and maybe we can get that corrected on the slide when we post it.
Yes.
So 4.5, as Jody mentioned, is focused on adult diploma programming. And we want to make sure that here, this is not focused on high school equivalency assessment preparation. So this is not describing your GED programming. This is describing either your credit completion adult diploma programming and or your standard adult diploma programming. And if that's not something that you offer in your consortium yet, then you can simply say that and make that clear. Okay, and then finally looking at item 4.6, this is focused on the use of volunteers in your program. So we're asking you to really clearly outline the different roles that your program uses volunteers for and what type of training you offer them or they engage in. And we want to remind everybody that per our volunteer training standards policy, volunteers must be receiving 2 hours of training annually. So that can be training that they participated in via the Literacy Minnesota volunteer training. That can be training that you offer in-house at your consortium. It can be training offered by the teacher that they work with. But we're asking you to document how you ensure that volunteers are getting that 12 hours of in-service training annually. So I do see one question that's come in so far from Allison. Is there a suggested number of pages for the section 4 areas? I don't know offhand overall if there is an overall page. As I look at these, I think typically each one of the narrative items might be a page or two. Jody, as you've been reading these in the most recent narrative applications, does that sound about right to you?
Yes. So I would say we have not offered any suggested length for any section other than section 1. And the reason we offered a suggested length for section 1 is to make sure that you don't give us 25 pages for section 1, which is too much. So we want you to kind of limit yourselves in section 1. In every other section, as you're saying, Kelly, I see your question. Yeah, I think include as much information as you need to in order to tell the story. And Section 4 tends to be a lengthy section, and the instructional program description document tends to be the longest document in this narrative. So yep, I would encourage you to, be thoughtful of your reviewers and know that it's a lot to read. But that being said, yeah, include as much as you need to adequately address the items and answer.
Yeah, I think it's, a guideline of trying to be as thorough as possible, but also concise, making it easy for reviewers to find the answers to all of the questions, but making sure that you really are attending to each one of the bullet points and what that question is asking for. Okay, let's look at the documents in section 4. You have 2 documents. I is the instructional program description. And as Jody said, that can be a lengthy one. And for that reason, it's really important that you include a table of contents so that reviewers and anyone, internally who might be using this is able to navigate the document. We really appreciate it when you're able to put links in the table of contents so people can easily navigate straight to different sections of that document. We encourage you to organize this either by course or type of instruction. So you can do this either using your different sites and listing their courses each separately or over multiple sites. We've also asked new this year, asked you to identify whether the course is an in-person, distance, or hybrid delivery. I'll also note as you are working through that document that one of the components is looking at the content standards that are addressed in each one of the courses. And really the more specific you can be about which content standards are addressed, the better. We generally prefer to see the actual anchor standards that are addressed rather than a broad all CCRS level A standards are addressed because realistically it's provides better guidance to the instructor and for the reviewer to know what the specific standards are. And then finally, document J is your content standards implementation plan. And again, this is forward looking. What is your consortium planning to do in the future to support the implementation of all 3 sets of content standards? So you're going to be planning for CCRS, ACES, TIF, and North Star Digital Literacy implementation. Those of you who have already gone through the CCRS cohort should have a CCRS implementation plan. You can submit that. You'll need to update it, and then you can incorporate ACES, TIF, and North Star into that plan. So certainly build on what you already have, but we want to see all 3 sets of standards represented. And we also want to see in this plan not just your training plans, but what are your plans to support implementation? So it's excellent that, if you plan to have all of your teachers go through CCRS foundations, but then what are you doing in your program to help them as they start to implement the standards? So we will pause at this point. I know that's a lot of information and probably more questions will come up as you start to dig in and work on this section and on the PD section. But at this point, do you have any questions we can answer? And if you don't, again, if you could just let us know in the chat if you're ready to move on or if you have some questions. Okay, it looks like people are doing okay. Are we ready to move to a break, Jody?
Yes, so thank you, Astrid, for walking us through sections 3 and 4. And we are at this point going to take about a 5-minute break. So get up and move for a little bit, check your email or whatever you need to do. I'll put on this break timer here. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Julie to talk about section 5.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'll give you a minute just to look over section 5, which is integration and collaboration. This is probably the one section that works the most with the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act kind of requirements with your local workforce development board. And then if we could just go to the, oh, she's on it. All right. So just some tips on writing this section. It's pretty straightforward if you're understanding the documentation. And if you aren't and you don't understand it at all, please just contact me and I can walk you through it. But each ABE consortia is in a workforce development area. If you were on the webinar earlier this morning, there was a map that showed the workforce development areas. And you can click on the link. I should have put it, let's see, I'm not sure if I can put that in the chat, but anyways, it's the same link and it'll bring you there and it'll help you I'm sorry, this is a different one. This is a link that was created specifically to identify ABE consortia and how they overlap within workforce development areas. And also on there are your Perkins consortia, your school district boundaries, etc. So it's a map that's interactive and it gives you an idea of the programming in the area. So you also need to locate the plans, and there's a link to the plans here. And so you might want to know, as I mentioned this morning, they will be due April 30th. So you should have them in time, the new ones, to submit with this narrative. So that's just an FYI that you can contact the local ABE representative on the board or the director, and they would be able to get that to you if they haven't posted it on their website. And most of them have been pretty good about posting it on the local workforce development website. Oftentimes it's the career force site. Next slide, please. The methods of referral. This is included in the memorandum of understanding, and those were submitted July 1st of this year. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of time to work with partners in developing solid referrals. This process could include or should include things that consortia can do to support concurrent enrollment. And when they speak of concurrent enrollment, they're talking about an adult basic education learner who's also getting services from your Title I partner at a career force center in the youth program or the dislocated worker program or their adult program. Or they also might be receiving services through vocational rehabilitation. And so they want to make sure that some of those resources are being delivered concurrently. for individuals to see more success. And we do know, because we checked how many ABE learners do receive services concurrently, and there actually are quite a few. And most oftentimes it's with the Pathways to Prosperity grants, where you're working with your career force centers, so they make sure they enroll them in ABE and all the other services. And if you're not sure about concurrent enrollment in your local area, you can always talk to like the Title I providers at the career force, and if you don't know who those are, you can contact me. Next slide, please. Coordination and collaboration on instructional programming with K-12, post-secondary, employers, career and technical education, and workforce development. This is an area where we have been trying to emphasize like integrated education and teaching. And so some places have done this successfully, others have attempted to do it. Please just address what you have done in this area. Some have really strong partnerships with K-12, others with post-secondary. If you're working with an employer, please do document that, or career and tech ed. In workforce development, I'm assuming that everyone will have something to write in regards to how they are collaborating with workforce development, as adult basic education is part of the workforce development system. Next slide, please. Correctional facilities. I think it was a year or two ago where we tallied every single site. I think there were 330 site across Minnesota. These are brick and mortar sites. And I was astounded to find out how many community correction ABE programs there are. I knew about the Department of Corrections, but there are a huge number of community correctional facilities as well. So please write down what you're doing around collaborations and referrals or anything with your local correctional facility as well. Next slide, please. Collaboration with tribal nations. I should have updated this slide. It wasn't new last year. It was new 2 years ago, I think, maybe not. And it was intended to document current partnerships and promote thought about possible partnerships. So there are maps that outline not only where tribal reservations are throughout Minnesota. There are also some tribes that don't have necessarily a geographic land location. So it's important to go and figure out where the tribal nations are and how you can do a better job, or maybe you are doing a great job, just document what that looks like. Next slide, please. Let me ask, are there any, okay, so the ABE manager of the consortia was asked to participate in the development of the regional transitions plan. So that's a requirement before the plan can be submitted. The regional transition coordinator has to send out an email asking all managers if they participated, if they want to participate in the development of the plan, and it's checked either yes or no. And again, the idea is that if it's shared with all staff, we can gather the input and ideas from all staff. So you should, managers, I think, we've worked with this long enough where most of them know what the regional transitions plan is, have been involved in developing the regional transitions plan, and could easily put their hands on it. If not, please contact your regional transitions coordinator and they would be able to support you in completing this and getting the document to you. Any questions? looking good, no questions. Why don't we move on to section 6 then? And I'll give you a few minutes just to review. This is a very short section. And then this is an area that I got a little confused about. This is really about like technology and not necessarily the distance learning that's addressed in the classes that Astrid, or the content standards, that courses that Astrid had covered. But this should answer the how and why around technology. How and why is a consortium using technology, and to what ends to serve the student? And then 6.2 should address additional resources, financial or in kind, like maybe your school district will provide the support for the computers or something like that. That would be in kind. And then you have to provide a document, the technology and distance learning plan, and it should explain what and when of technology and distance learning use. And I believe that's it for section 6. Are there questions about section 6?
So
Is this else? Oh, go ahead.
You want me to take that one, Julie?
Sure, go. Yep.
And I see your question, is this also a forward-looking document? And I assume you are talking about document O, and the answer to that is yes. The ones, excuse me, the ones that are plans, so like the professional development plan and the content standards integration plan and this technology and distance learning plan, definitely should be rooted in the present, sort of what's going on now. But yes, that should be a forward-looking document thinking about what are plans for tech and DL distance learning in the future. So yeah, good question.
And I think that covers that section in my sections.
Great. Thank you, Julie. And yes, I agree, Anne, that probably will understand everything today, but the trick will be 3 months down the road when you're writing these documents. So just know that you'll be able to look back at this recording and reach out to any of us on the team at any time. All right, so at this point, we're going to take a look at section 7. So I will give you a minute to look at your requirements document and take a look at the items. Oh, and there are no documents for section 7, so it's just 3 items in section 7. All right, so some tips on section 7, just so you know, this section is new since the last time you wrote a narrative. So we added this section in 2018. In some ways, I think for folks, this might be the most enjoyable section because you get to tell some great stories about your students. And that's like really the reason why we do this work in the first place. And you get to, sort of be real about challenges that you're facing. So for this section, be honest and be thoughtful and take the opportunity to talk about great things and challenges. One change to this section from last year, so those of you who reviewed narratives last year might notice this change. Item 7.2 from last year's narratives was just a general, what challenges are you facing? So we decided that for 2021, it really made sense to make that question specifically about the pandemic, because it's hard to imagine that any of us would talk about any challenges that weren't related to the pandemic. So we just decided to make that a little more specific, thinking about what your responses were over the course of this program year and what the plans are for continued response when you're writing this. And then just a note about item 7.4. We are really looking for an answer that refers to equity. So you may want to think of that in terms of racial equity and using sort of a racial equity lens, but we understand that equity is broader than just race. But we're really not just talking about diversity, not just about having a program with lots of diverse students in it. And we're also not necessarily asking about equal access, about the fact that you allow any student to attend. We do assume you have a diverse student population. We do assume that people in your community should have equal access to your programming, regardless of who they are. But we really are hoping that you can dig a little deeper than that into issues of equity and racial equity. If you're not sure where to start with item 7.4, I would suggest that you start with the equity statement that our team has put together. And you can find that right on our top landing page at mnabe.org. That statement really is for us as a team and the work that we do. So it probably doesn't work exactly for you, but it could be a good kind of jumping off point to think about what does working towards equity mean in your particular context.
Jody, can I just jump in for a second? It looks like we have a numbering error on the slide, and that item is actually 7.3.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, you guys. I took last year's slides from last year's workshop, and I thought that I had updated them all, and I missed a few numbering changes. So
thanks for noting that, Allison.
Yes, thank you, Allison. So you're right. There is no 7.4. This should say 7.3. Item 7.3 is about equity. Thank you for catching that. I will correct that before we post these slides. Yes, Allison is going to be our new editor, our new proofreader for everything. All right, are there any other questions about section 7 before we keep going? Anybody else catch any typos along the way? Why don't you go ahead, just so we know you're still with us. If you have no questions, if you're okay at this point, go ahead and just confirm that to us in the chat, which will give anybody who might be in the process of typing a question, that gives you a little more space to do that. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate hearing from you. All right, I think I am going to keep going then. So we're almost at the end here. So section 8 is the final section of the narrative, and it is pretty straightforward. So I invite you to go back to the narrative requirements document, take a quick look at section 8. Section 8 has no items, no narrative items, only documents. So that makes it pretty straightforward. And while I have this document pulled up in the screen, I will just note there is a section 9 to the narrative. However, that is only for brand new consortia. So none of you need to worry about section 9. So for section 8, a few tips on this one. You should wait and do this section last because you need to include your annual application and your tables, and those are due to our office every year on June 1st. And to create those tables and to get all the data for those tables, you have to have all of your hours entered excuse me, through the end of April. So you won't be able to work on this section really at all until May. And there are just these two documents, document P, which is just the annual application and the tables. So exactly what you submit to our office for your, to receive your annual funding. You will also put it in your narrative. You need to do both things. You still will need to submit that application and tables in SERVs, the way you always do every year. You will need to do that on or before June 1st, 2021. And in addition, you will need to put that same application and those tables, those documents into your online narrative. So this doesn't replace that annual application process in SERVs. Just want to be clear about that. And for document Q, this is the level gains report. The key thing to know about this is that you should include one report that is for the entire consortium. And then if you have additional ABE providers in the consortium, you need to include the level gains of post-test reports separately for each provider. So remember, a provider is any entity, usually either another school district or a CBO, that receives ABE funding. So if the fiscal agent entity passes on ABE funding to another district and that district hires their own teachers and runs their own programming, that is a provider. And we do want to see in document Q, one report for every separate provider. Linda likes section 8. Thanks, Linda. I like section 8 too. Good question. What date ranges will we use for document P and then again for document Q this year? Excellent question. For document P, you will submit all of the same application and tables that you submit to us on June 1st. So just hold on and wait till you get guidance when that application is released in the spring about what exactly needs to be included there and what the date ranges are. In terms of document Q, we did shift that last year, but the reason that we shifted the date range last year was because we delayed the submission date because of COVID. So I do not think that we will adjust that this year, but let me, yeah, okay. So I'm just confirming that I do believe what is the date range that is indicated here in the narrative requirements document is correct. And that date range is July 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021. Now we recognize that is a little bit of an odd date range. The reason we are doing that is because normally that level gains report, that level gains table would be for a program year, which is July 1 to June 30th. However, your narrative is due on June 1st. So you obviously can't include that entire program year. And we can't do it through May 30th because that would give you only one day to create that report. So it's actually just going to be a 10-month report, July 1, 2020 to April 30th, 2021. And yeah, we've kind of gone back and forth on our team about whether that's the best way to approach it, but I think that's where we've landed that's what we're going to go with. So if something changes about that based on something that happens this upcoming year with COVID or whatever, I will absolutely be sure to communicate that to you clearly. But yep, I think you can count on that time frame for now. July 1, 2020 to April 30th, 2021. Excellent question. Are there any other questions about section 8? Not seeing anything else. Yep, I appreciate if you don't have any questions, if you want to confirm that. So we give anybody who might be typing another minute. I'll just take this opportunity also to say I have an 8th grader in the next room from me who is currently doing gym class. So I don't know if you all are hearing some like thunking and jumping, but that's what that is. Sorry about that.
Don't hear a thing.
Okay, that's good. All right, good. It's a little quiet now, but a few minutes ago there was some vigorous activity over there. Belinda is asking a question. What happens if the post-rate testing is lower due to various reasons such as governor's dial back, etc.? Yeah, absolutely, Belinda. And I think we can already guess that the post-test rates and the level gain rates represented in these reports that you will be submitting in June will probably be lower than they would have been otherwise, based on what is going on in our world right now. And that absolutely just is what it is. And do not, don't lose any sleep over it. Be sure that you are post-testing, as much as you can, to the extent you can. Be sure that you're giving students opportunities to get level gains if and when you can. And then be sure you are accurately recording that data in SID and running those reports, correctly. And that's all we ask. There's no sort of requirement for what post-test rate has to show on that report, for what level gain rate, what the minimum is. We aren't setting any minimums. And I know all of your reviewers will absolutely understand all of the limitations because they themselves have those same limitations. So yeah, I hear your concerns, Belinda, and we all feel those things, and definitely, know that we all understand why those rates might be lower this year. Yes, breath of relief about that. All right, excellent. So we have made it all the way through that document and talked through all of the sections that you'll have to put together. So kind of the final piece of information to share with you today is some thoughts about creating this narrative online. I know many of you reviewed 2020 narratives, so that gave you a really great opportunity to see what some online narratives look like. So as you are considering your format options, basically, you have essentially 3, or consortia so far have used one of these 3 different options. The first option is to use a Google site, and that does seem to be the most popular option. I would say the majority of narratives that we have seen in the last couple of years that have been submitted have been a Google site. So that may be a typical choice for many of you, especially if your district uses Google products. That might be a easy choice for you. So this is Mankato ABE. This is a Google site. Another one that we saw this year that some of you reviewed is Moorhead ABE. So you notice it starts with sites.google.com. So that's another one. I think Google products are pretty straightforward and pretty good at being user-friendly. There's different templates and sort of formats that you can use. And then, you can kind of add in your own pictures and attach documents into the different sections. So if you really are not sure at all what to use, I would suggest that Google Sites is probably a good place to start. We have had some programs that have chosen to use Wix, which also seems to be a pretty good tool, and so some folks have really liked that. So again, I think typically what it looks like is they sort of give you a template and a format, and you maybe choose some of the background and the colors, and kind of, plop in some of your own images and things into the currently existing template, and it ends up looking pretty good. So that is another option for you. We have had several consortia use, I might have messed up that link. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, we've had a couple of consortia use Wix recently, so you can consider that. Maybe if you have a little more experience with that tool, you're more comfortable with that. The third option that you would have is if you already have some kind of a website set up for your organization, you could embed it directly within a website. So here's an example of this, that Southwest ABE has their own website, southwestabe.org, and then they put a 5-year narrative section on their site, and set it up here with all of the different sections. So you notice this, if I go to the home page, this is their southwestabe.org regular website. And then I think they have their 5-year narrative linked over here. So that might be something if your district has a website and you are in, you're in good with the IT people and you think they would let you do that and support you in doing that, that could be another option. Yep, I messed up that link too. So that is another option that we have seen programs use recently. So basically, we suggest that you choose one of those 3 options, sort of with Google Sites maybe being the most straightforward and the best place to start and the first thing to consider, unless you already have an idea that maybe one of these other tools would make, or one of these other approaches would make more sense to you. So the other thing to know about creating an online narrative is that Susan WB at Literacy Minnesota is available for support for narrative writers specifically in this area. So if you are feeling overwhelmed or intimidated or don't know where to start with your narrative, reach out to Susan. She is, I hope you already know Susan, have worked with Susan, but she is great at offering just basic, helpful, supportive, user-friendly tech support with this kind of an issue. And for several ABE consortia, she has helped them make the choice of which tool to use and get a basic sort of framework set up and get comfortable enough with the tools to be able to then, continue to work on it. So I encourage you, if you are feeling daunted by the idea of making an online narrative, to go ahead and reach out to Susan. So I'm going to pause there for just a second. Any questions about online narratives? Or any of these tools? Teresa, I do see your question going back to section 8, which is what if we have almost 0 post tests? I would say if you have almost 0 post tests, then that is what you have, and that is what you put in the report, and that is what you post in your narrative. There no big axe will fall from the sky or anything. It is what it is, I guess, for this year's data. There you go. Linda is confirming that you don't have 0 post tests, you have 6. So there you go. Who knows what the next few months will bring us, right? Who knows? Any other questions that we have missed, or any questions or concerns about the online narrative aspect? Can I just sort of take the temperature of the group at this point? How are you all feeling about the idea of building your own Google site or your own Wix site or using your narrative? Yeah, good. I'm sure there's some of you out there who are feeling okay about that. Good. I see your comment, Teresa, about connecting with Metro South on post tests. Great. Yep, you'll get it done, make it happen. Connect with some of the younger people on your staff might be a strategy. Younger people tend to, have had potentially a little more experience in this area. Yeah, Belinda, you're saying that you have published through your website before, so that's great. Yep. Feeling good. All right, anybody want to admit to not feeling so good about an online narrative? Because no shame. We know it can be a little intimidating. I know there were a couple of consortia in last year's cohort that did not feel very good about that at the get-go, but I think Susan was able to offer some support. All right. Well, I'm going to keep us going. We're getting close to the end of our time here and the end of our content. So before we wrap up, I do just want to tell you about next steps and what to expect now. Like I said at the outset, I suggest that the very next thing you do is to convene your team or whoever is going to be working on this. And I know for a couple of you, you might be the only person from your consortium that's here today. But I do hope you can meet with at least one other person to start making some plans. I know some of you have a larger group of people here today. So I suggest you all, while this is kind of fresh in your mind, plan a meeting to talk through what you learned today and think about what's the timeline, who are the point people, probably sort of section by section of the narrative. Another thing you need to decide pretty quickly, I would say, is which online platform are you going to use? How are you going to get this up onto the internet? And reach out to Susan WB if you need support in that. At this point, we don't have, our MDE team does not have any more formal support or training to offer you. However, in other years, sometimes narrative writers in the cohort have chosen the option of getting together on a webinar in February or March just to check in at that point and kind of share, where they're at with things and ask questions about things that have been tricky. So I will keep in touch with you all as a group. And as we get closer, I will put that out there to you. And then, we can all decide as a group whether or not you want to do that. If most people don't really want to, we certainly do not have to, but we can if at that point everybody feels like it would be worth the time. So that is a possibility. And then, of course, ultimately June 1st, 2021 is when everything has to be ready to go. And then the submission is a very simple, just email me a link to your online narrative. So that is everything that we have to share with you today. I'm pleased that we finished up with a little extra time. I thought we might be a little more crunched for time. But at this point, I will just open it up broadly for any other questions, any discussion about this. I welcome you at this point to put any thoughts or questions into the chat, or if you'd like to, I think you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question or make a comment out loud. Thanks for hanging in. Excellent question. Where can we find the recording? Once we have this recording processed, and we will make sure that the recording has captions, as we know that's important for accessibility for some folks, then I will post this recording on that same mnabe.org page that has all of the 5-year narrative. Ooh, can I find it? So I will post it here on this page. And also my hope is, what I'm thinking will be useful is to add in some time markers for you. So I'll try to add some notes that say section 4 starts at minute 25 or something like that, because I am hopeful this recording can be a useful resource for you and you can go back and use it in that way. But I'll try to make it so that you don't have to listen from beginning to end to find what you want, if that makes sense. Are there other, you're welcome, Teresa. Are there any other questions, thoughts? Is there anything that I have missed in the chat along the way? MDE colleagues, I don't know if you.
Nope, you are caught up.
Okay.
I don't see anything.
Belinda, good question. Is program resources section strictly tech resources? So section 6 is about program resources. And I think we are thinking of that section somewhat more broadly than just technology. However, probably likely much of what you are going to discuss in section 6 is about technology. So in section 6, item 6.1 is specifically about technology. Item 6.2 is meant to be resources, other resources in addition to technology. So that might be, maybe get some extra grants, maybe you have charitable contributions, maybe you have a partnership with a community partner who provides some additional service. So it could be a little broader than just technology, but definitely in section 6, you will talk about technology. That will definitely be there. Good question, Belinda. Yes, and I see the shout outs in the chat to our ASL interpreters. Thank you for your help today. Anything else that we can talk through or answer for you? I'm sure nobody will complain about wrapping up a little bit early, so I'm fine doing that. But I just want to make sure that you have the time and space to ask anything that you need to. Thank you, Linda. Glad that it seemed thorough to you. And I agree, we've had some really, we've had a lot of ASL interpreters helping us with events over the last 3 weeks. So it's been really good. All right, well, I'm gonna say that we are finished here. We'll hang on for a little bit longer, but if you log off now, you won't miss anything else. Thank you so much for being here, and